all to this very important panel on gender violence in digital spaces. This discussion is a part of 16-day activism campaign led by CWDS under the dynamic leadership of Professor Mani Maikalai, who is here, and who has managed to bring together 16 universities in this participatory campaign. The 16 Days of Activism Against Gender Based Violence is an annual global campaign from 25th November to 10th December, which is actually the Human Rights Day. It highlights the need to end violence against women and girls. It started in 1991 by activists, and it is also coordinated by the Center for Women's Global Leadership. UN has supported the campaign through Unite to End Violence Against Women initiative since 2008, using color orange as a symbol for a future free from violence. Uh, Unfortunately, I didn't know how to put the background. Otherwise, there's a beautiful orange, flyer of this event. uh, since 2022, 29th November, that is today, is also it also marks the International Day for Women Human Rights Defenders, recognizing the unique risks faced by women defenders due to gender and advocacy work that they do. We know that violence, gender based violence, has remained deeply pervasive despite all the campaigns that have been spearheaded by various organizations. It is a worldwide phenomenon. And a significant share of women and girls experience violence in their lifetime. By linking violence against women to human rights, the campaign frames GBOV, that is gender based violence, as violation of dignity, justice, and equality, demanding structural change. In a growing capitalist world where we have sugar, fat free ice cream, alcohol free beer, campaigns like these remind us that notwithstanding the increasingly discursive formations of things like gender, subjectivity, and difference to suit the political economy of global capitalism, feminism remains committed to the interests of embodied experiences of women. Every year, the campaign focuses on a specific theme. The theme this year is violence against women in digital spaces. It is a theme that grows more urgent with every new technological shift, every new platform, and every new way in which our lives are migrating online. Uh, at a time when when digital spaces shape public discourse, activism, work, intimacy, and even governance, confronting gender violence in digital spaces is not only an academic exercise. It is an imperative question that we must engage with actively. When we speak of violence against women in digital spaces, we also need to acknowledge that it does not remain confined to virtual sphere. It spills over into homes, workspaces, mental health, physical safety, reminding us that whatever happens online is deeply entangled with the offline world. We have an excellent panel today, which brings together an academic and a practitioner and an advocate, two brilliant people together who have been working tirelessly to understand these new terrains of power. With them, we will try to understand how digital technologies enable or amplify gender based violence. Um, what does accountability look like in spaces like global spaces that are global, rapidly evolving? How can law, policy, pedagogy, and design intervene in meaningful ways? And also how we can collectively, and most important, in fact, how we can collectively imagine a safer and more inclusive and more equitable digital future. So I express, before I pass on to Chaitali, I express my gratitude to my colleague, Dr. Amina, for putting this together. My gratitude to Dr. Firdaus, Professor Brara, and all my colleagues who gave in their inputs. And of course, my dearest Chaitali for all the help in making this possible. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussions. Thank you all for being here on Saturday morning. Over to you, Chaitali.
Sure, Professor Zaidi. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Amina, for holding this conversation today. Um, uh, Good morning, everybody. My name is Chaitali. I'm a PhD scholar at the Sarojini Naidu Centre for Women's Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia, and I have the privilege of moderating this panel today. One that sits at the very intersection of global policy, the legal realities, digital economies, and the lived experiences in the 21st century South Asia. And as we commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls, and we stand within the global context of the 16 days of global activism, we are invited to rethink what violence looks like in the 21st century. Because violence today is not just in our homes, it's not just on the streets, but it is, and also not in the workplaces, it's gotten to our screens. And yet, as scholars like Gajala and Udupa remind us that the digital is not a separate world, it is deeply embedded in our private and public lives, in the economies, in our relationships, in the very aspirations we think of. And we are fortunate to have two brilliant speakers with us today. Pallavi is a policy consultant at Whiteshield, UAE. She is a evening scholar. She has done her MBA from Oxford. She's a TEDx speaker, a dear friend whose work locates digital governance and future of work ecosystems in the global context. Advocate Ayesha Jamal is a practicing lawyer at the Delhi High Court and Supreme Court. Extremely privileged to have you here, Ayesha. Your practice is rooted in gender based violence, cybercrime, digital rights. We are very keen to have your deep insights around all of these issues. And digital violence in, I mean, of course, in the cyberspace is not just a technical issue, it's a structural issue where caste, class, sexuality, gender identity, labor hierarchies, state platform, all of these converge into some sort of a power that we are wanting to navigate through this panel. And we have global debates on online hate, algorithmic inequalities, AI enabled deepfakes, surveillance capitalism, erasures of informal labor, blurred private public boundaries. Um, so, Pallavi, I would want to sort of begin with you. And you work at the very nexus where global policy, digital transformation, and gendered realities intersect, right? And across the world, countries are struggling with the new front lines of harms like deep fakes, like doxing, like data exploitation, new forms of digital labor vulnerabilities are cropping up. And yet, yesterday in one of our conversations, you mentioned beautifully that there must be hope at the end of the tunnel. So, my first question is to you, from a global policy lens, what emerging forms of digital violence do you see disproportionately affecting women and marginalized genders today? And how are societies and economies responding, whether through regulation, platform accountability, or community driven solutions? Um, Over to you, Pallavi.
Thank you. And that's such an important question to really meditate on, and very rightly put by Dr. Zaidi and also by you, Chetali, that digital is not a paraphrase that exists beyond our physical realities, which is there is a patriarch and obviously there are gendered minorities. And digital is basically a trickle down effect of how we look at gendering our entire well being, our gendering our opinions, gendering our agency, etc. But the hard reality is that we cannot escape AI and we cannot put digital governance, digital transformation on the back burner. But having said that, it is also important to make sure that the right safeguards in place so that the access, the resources and achievements, just how Butler defines empowerment, needs to be an integral part of how we are looking at this new age world where digital is at the epicenter of how we are looking at revolution. So, if we look at what are the biases that are against women and gendered minorities, they can basically be divided under five heads. First, very rightly said by you, it is the AI driven image abuses and deepfakes. The second is, of course, toxic swarming or coordinated pylons. The third is the sextortion and tech facilitated intimate partner violence. The fourth is the platform with meditated economic violence. And the last is your everyday digital hate that accumulates into exclusion. Now, double tapping on each one of them, let's start with AI driven image abuses and how do they affect basically a lot of women, especially in public spaces. Now, non-consensual intimate imagery has moved from revenge porn to now today AI-generated nudes and deepfake. And Instagram, Twitter is a votary of how we are using narratives which do not even exist in shallow reality to isolate certain women, especially women in public life, definitely in emerging geographies, including India, where deepfakes are being now used for political discrediting and blackmail, with almost no realistic path to take them down, to remedy, or to reputational repair. I mean, it's a ladder-like behavior if one has to report them and to take all these abuses down. The second is definitely doxing, swarming, or coordinated pylons. Now, feminist and queer voices especially face coordinated harassment. It could be related to dogpiling, mass reporting, brigading, or even doxing, where their phone numbers, addresses, their private details are put online. And the abuse is obviously infused with other layers of discrimination that we have in emerging geographies, especially ethnic countries like India, where it is related to caste, communal, and gender hatred. Now, the third, which we were talking about, is extortion and tech facilitated intimate partner violence. Now, this we had seen from a very long time, but this has now come into being and as a part of international regulations, where intimate partners or strangers, especially on dating apps, are now using spyware and stalkware and account takeovers for their intimate partners. This is increasingly happening over encrypted messages and even on dating apps, as I said, and certain dated apps and that definitely being flagged for being a votary of sextortions. The fourth is the platform mediated economic violence. Now, it's a world of Instagram and it's a world of algorithms, right? So sometimes the ratings, reviews, and algorithmic visibility is weaponized against gendered minorities and obviously against queer identities to make sure that there is a stab on the economic value. How many likes did you get? Did you come in the list of the Instagram reels or the Instagram voices that come on our screen every day? So there's an entire narrative around it. There's an entire lobbying around it, how certain people get visibility and certain do not. That eventually stabs the economic value. And once it stabs the economic value, it leads to dysfunction of power, as both of these subsets are related to eventually who gets seen and whose voices is heard. And the last is the everyday hate. Now, it might just look at like something that we are used to when we talk about trolling, misogynistic and queerphobic memes, deep jokes, etc. But let's look at the trickle down effect. The number of suicides that have increased over the years, the number of depression cases that have increased, the isolation, the narratives, the hate that we use in our normal day lives, everything leads to how we are normalizing exclusion, how we are normalizing digital hate. So these are the five areas which I am now looking at as the five most important and pervasive areas which are leading to exclusion of gendered identities, including women. Now, as you mentioned, there's definitely light at the end of the tunnel. So, both at the three layers of platform, of community, and also of agency, there have been certain very good developments that have happened. Unfortunately, in the mature economies, because they have both the power and the resources to deal with things which are related to gendered minorities. Now, if you look at regulations, Europe lately launched a EU Digital Service Act, which is primarily related to digital acts of violence. And they now oblige large platforms to assess and mitigate systemic risks that are related to gender based violence, for making the algorithms transparent, and also to make sure that there is cooperation between the regulators and the researchers, that is academia. And regulators need to get inspiration from researchers on how the law has to be enhanced and has to be equalized. However, when I compare it to emerging geographies, and I'm not putting India on spot, it's just that it is home country and I understand law of the country. Our law is still now only based on the permissive level when we talk about digital exclusion and digital violence, especially with regard to our existing law, be the IPC, the IT Act, or IT rules. They talk about, say, obscenity, defamation, impersonation, etc., but they don't really target the nuances of digital violence and digital isolations. And hence, it is open to interpretation, and the entire process takes dog's years to culminate into a reality. Now, my understanding of right now, like I'm working on the digital transformation of one of the biggest ministries in UAE, and because we are here, our gender is a core part of how we are looking at digital transformation. My understanding is that we definitely need tech specific gender aware laws, which recognize AI facilitated abuse, which recognize and create fast survivor centric takedowns or impose duties of care on major platforms. And hence, that need to become an integral part of the law. Now, coming to platform accountability, the establishment is safety. But that doesn't really work in today's scenario, right? It has to become an integral part of systemic design. For example, if there's a spyware, there's a report abuse tab that comes on onto our screens. But many a times people are busy or they do not have access to digital understanding and they don't report it. It is important that all this systemic awareness needs to become a part of the platform, like how we have in the UK, where the platform itself is safe and these reports are generated, but only after the platform has made sure that the safeguard principles are followed through. And the last is community. Here, definitely India is way ahead than the other geographies when we talk about community collectives. That is also because of our shared history of colonization, our shared history of invading, our shared history of the kind of seclusion that happens with gendered identities. And therefore, in countries like India, one can take inspiration of how fast our helplines and feminist tech projects float. They might not see the light of the day because of bureaucracy, because of power dynamics between the patriarch and the gendered identities. But at least there's a lot of focus on helplines, on feminist literature, on feminist tech policies, and also on feminist collectives. So my light at the end of the tunnel is whilst we need to have very strong laws related to tech specific abuse, as far as the self-help groups and the community-driven advancement is concerned, we are way ahead than advanced geographies.
Wonderful. Thanks. Thank you, Pallavi, for that insight, that expansive framework that you probably have given us, and for reminding us that while the digital landscape can be hostile, it is also a space of innovation. It is also a space of community repair. So while the global tells us where the world is moving in terms of the digital realities, the legal realities in India tell us where the ground beneath our feet is really shifting. And this is where Aisha's work becomes very necessary. So, Aisha, the next question is for you, and that is in your legal practice, what are the biggest disconnects between how the Indian laws currently define digital violence and how the survivors experience it through your case studies, through the work that you've done? And where do cases collapse? Do they collapse in evidence, in how the police responds, in how what the language around policy is, or the intersectional identities that are growing every day? So, what is it, Aisha? Really?
Thank you, Chetali, for your question, and it was lovely listening to you, Pallavi. I had some interesting insights. Now, what I'd like to start with, I'll come to the legal point in about 2 minutes. There was something very shocking which I found out in 2021. I was pursuing my master's in artificial intelligence and Chinese IP from Berkeley. And there it struck me, because it was a general discussion, that there is no concrete framework for tangibly addressing, in terms of legal realities, like you said, digital violence against women. And this is a global phenomenon. I mean, I'm sure there will be people who disagree, but if you look at the grassroots, there is no framework which pragmatically translates into its physical equivalent. Okay. So, in today's world, we are all digital citizens as well. So, either we have a parallel constitution or a parallel legal framework to tackle it. Otherwise, the problem is that violence does not erupt digitally. It erupts in the mind, then it becomes physical, then it takes up digital space, right? So these are three stages, and it's a vicious cycle because technology is now accessible to a lot of people. Globally, more than 65 to 70% women or girls who have digital access have faced some form of violence. It could be as small as stalking. It could be, and let's not even talk about the bank scams and all, they're certainly gender neutral. um, the problem with our laws is, number one, we just talk about consent, consent, and consent. You know, I give my consent to use something that's not even relevant when it comes to violence. Your My providing consent could obviously, I mean, you have websites which ask for your consent, but you'll rarely see that those websites are the ones that lead to violence against women online in the cyberspace. It's always some form of jilted lover, some form of extortion, any activity like that. A lot of people contesting divorce cases against each other, I see, are also contesting a battle online, which is hidden, and they're using an alias or something. So my personal my personal opinion would be that the IT Act, the recent IT Act and the recent BNS, they're very centric on survivor support, um, accountability to the victim, giving regular updates to the victim online, but they are not really translating into their physical equivalent of compensating the victim. And compensation can only happen once. I mean, number one, the only compensation you can do is either in monetary form, because compensation in any other way, in most cases, you're unable to track down the person who's abusing because they're hiding behind an alias, right? So we need some sort of mechanism to be able to get to that point. Otherwise, there is no accountability. If I know I can hide behind a smoke screen and abuse somebody or take undue advantage of somebody, and more in most situations, women already have a relation with the man who's abusing them online in some form or the other. I completely agree with the principle of civil liability imposed on intermediaries. But like I said, intermediaries are the last of the worry at this moment, because the digital violence that we are talking about does not stem from these. Most of the digital violence is experienced either through the dark web or on WhatsApp or any other equivalent platform. So my problem is that the issues such as online incident reporting, filing of EFIRs, women not having to go to the police station, progress updates to the victims, victim compensation are the least of the worries. And these are, it's like too little too late. This is introduced in the BNS as a major step towards tackling digital violence. But in my opinion, and I would love to hear somebody counter me on this, in my personal opinion, I don't think data protection and consent are what is the need of the hour. It's the accountability and the system which reaches us from, which helps us navigate from A to B, the crime to the accountability, that is very important. That is why I propose that the solution should be that the legal framework needs an intersection with tech stakeholders, number one. Number two, the tech stakeholders also need a survivor support service, right? So we have to navigate this carefully, write it down, and understand that if we are digital citizens, our framework and our legal framework, our police protection framework, and our access to justice framework has to translate just as equally as it would in its physical realm.
Right. I mean, survivor centered approach is probably what you've reflected upon, and I'm sure this is extremely necessary to be taken up structurally within the country's legal systems, legal and paralegal systems for that matter. So, I mean, going back to this brings us back to the global local dialogue. And Pallavi, if you think of Aisha's observations, the delays, the evidentiary gaps, the invisibilized labor, the moral policing that informs legal responses, I want you to bring in again. And given the work that you've done in the digital governance and future of work ecosystems, what does real inclusion look like? What does it mean for to have women, queer persons, informal laborers, gig workers, sex workers, especially in the rapidly expanding AI driven digital economy? What does inclusion really mean, and what where do we see hope, where do we see innovation and the shifts in power, uh, for that matter?
Sure. I think whenever one talks about inclusion, it takes me back to Butler. And I think for me, Butler will always be the umbrella framework that I follow for any of my feminist discussions. And that is that it has to follow the three-way path, the three-way lens of resources, agency, and achievements. That inclusion cannot be without resources, without giving access to gendered minorities, to queer folks, to gig workers on the axis of innovation. The agency is the power to understand that how these particular systems work and intertwine with their public and private life. And the achievements is to make sure that whenever innovation happens, the voices of the gendered minorities is not only looked at as a beneficiary, but also as voices that sit at the center of how these systems are revolutionizing. Just how Aisha mentioned that the survivor's kit is only pertaining to the beneficiaries on taking accountability of how they are doing or giving them the bare minimum support, but really not going down to the root cause of what really measures can be taken to make sure that they are compensated in some form or the other. So, to put the entire umbrella into being, there are four areas which I think inclusion can be divided into when we talk about digital governance and digital transformation. The first is basic rights for all workers. The second is the gender and the queer aware AI systems. The third is the governance of data and algorithms. And the fourth is the economic fairness. That is, that there should not be any digital precarity. Now, coming to the first, which is basic rights for all workers. Now, especially with regard to gig work or women's care work or queer or informal workers, it cannot be regarded as flexible jobs. These are jobs which require social protection systems, which require minimum earnings, which require due credit from the any kind of security assessments that go on at the back end when we're talking about governance models. So basic rights of all workers need to be protected with. The second is the gender and the queer aware AI systems. Now, inclusion doesn't only mean giving them voice, it also means that we revolutionize how our data sets look into. You know, most of the data sets and the data models, especially the governance project that I'm working on right now, are from the eyes of an able bodied white patriarch on how we are looking at data models. That means you're already excluding the agency and the voices of gendered minorities, let alone caste communal minorities. So hence, making sure that these systems, the biased data sets are mended in this system. They are the data systems are functional in a way in which we allow them to choose their name, their identities, and they're giving them equal safety when we talk about digital and physical environments, and also assessing AI harms before deployment. I mean, it is always better to have certain kind of resources to make sure that a harm can be avoided, can be evaded, and hence the deployment needs to have a risk engine in its place. The third is governance of data and algorithms. We've already talked about it. Economic segregation is not away from digital revolution. Whose voices is heard, who benefits the most comes down to how the algorithm works. Hence, platform cooperatives, data trusts, workers' council offer models where communities co-own the data, where communities sit down and understand that only one party cannot just be a beneficiary. They need to co-own data, shape algorithmic rules, and also share economic value. And the last is economic fairness. Aisha highlighted it a little more evidently, and I would just like to double tap on it, that we need to move away from onboarding women as gig workers and give them equal rights to actually establish their work as full time workers. Now, if we do not give them the agency to understand the AI system, if we do not give them the agency to understand revolutionary work, they will be still on the periphery of economic revolution, and hence their voices and inclusion will always be marginalized. Now, how are we looking at inclusion that has happened in the other spaces? And certain very good case study examples are definitely what we discussed, the safety feature, which is now becoming a systemic design by default and not just a like a cautionary statement that systems are maintaining. The strongest comes obviously from the EU Violence Against Women Directive, which has now run a systemic risk assessment and gender disaggregated transparency, making them an integral part of the governance models both in the private and the public spaces. Second is how in the UK, from women as beneficiaries, they're also becoming co governors. So, women collectives have now been an integral part of how the law and the directives are now being floated, and their voices and their academic research is becoming one of the quality metrics that governance models are following, so that the right research gets visibility and it was also implemented into actionable proof. The third is that algorithmic control needs to move away from being opaque to being negotiated to algorithmic governance, meaning that we need to have institutionalized worker representation, civil societies, or even self-help groups to now understand on how algorithm works and make sure that it is not has is biased against a particular identity while moving the power dynamics always towards the patriarch. And And the last is that the ad hoc system to support women needs to move to the complete rights ecosystem, where we invest in feminist legal clinics, where we invest in digital security help desks, community paralegals that specialize specifically in tech facilitated violence and gig worker disputes. Now, if we pair all of this with very strong governance system, right kind of laws, right kind of regulations, then the revolution can become like a gateway to open doors for more feminist advancement and at least establishing narratives on a 50-50 world.
Right. I mean, absolutely, Pallavi. But I mean, again, listening to the both of you, what stands out for me is that, and also speaking from my own research with the sex workers in Delhi and Uttar Pradesh and Sonagachi, uh, I feel digital is not an external world. In communities that are marginalized by caste again, Pallavi, every time we have this conversation, caste, class, migration, criminalization, digital harm often mirrors the exact structural vulnerabilities that the people are facing offline, like surveillance, like moral policing, gatekeeping, gaps in legal safeguards, precarious labor, deep mental health problems, issues, burdens. For the workers, the digital becomes both economic a lifeline and a new site of criminalization. Digital crimes are blurred with the bodily crimes. Privacy collapses into precarity. And the public private divide is already thin, that was already thin, is now dissolving completely. Which brings me to linking Aisha to this conversation, and is which is that if we imagine a survivor centered digital justice system in India, Aisha, one that is fast and is compassionate and is effective, and by compassionate I mean it's subject centered, what would its core elements be realistically? What shifts do you think or you believe that are urgent and achievable in the next few years, if that's the case?
This is a trick question. Um, I'll tell you something. In my opinion, um, I would love to hear otherwise, but in my opinion, the number one solution is empowerment, because this is not going to stop. Violence will not stop. I'm not being a pessimist, I'm just being realistic. Violence has not stopped in our world. Empowerment is the solution. That is on a personal level. There are a lot of you will read a lot of UN updates that, on the policy front they're working on sensitizing boys on reducing toxic masculinity and things like that. All that is very nice. It's going on as a parallel development, but it's not addressing the thing. This will work 50 years down the line. What we need to address now is something else, because what we eat affects us much later, right? So these things, I mean, the prologue has to be very strong, and the prologue was always empowerment. As far as the legal framework is concerned, I would reiterate what I said, that we need an intersection of the tech industry and the legal framework. Now, that sounds very good. Uh, when we talk about intersection, you have the IT Act, which comes into play. You have the MeitY. I'm talking about the Indian legal landscape. Then you have the imposition of liabilities on intermediaries. Uh, Again, I mean, I'm afraid I'll be sounding repetitive, but I feel that the legislations that we've enacted in the past 2 years also to address digital bullying and cybercrime, they've not been very helpful. I've been dealing with a couple of cases of cybercrime. They were not against women, but they were just regular cybercrime complaints. I can't disclose more details, and I can tell you that the state of affairs of the um, follow up and the trajectory is so abysmal that it leaves litigants hopeless. They'd rather not get into it. And there are a lot of litigants who want to abort their entire proceeding because they are frustrated. Everyone does not have the same mental bandwidth to go through a case, right? And everyone doesn't even have the means. Now, there are a lot of, apart from the fact that access to justice is very important and legal awareness is very important, access to justice is much later. You first need access to legal recourse. All those things are one thing. There are a lot of women victims who get sabotaged at the first instance of digital violence. It's very few of us who can stand up and say, no, I want to fight this out, because there is an entire layer, unfortunately, which is just killed by the stigma itself. So we are treating the symptoms, but we are nurturing the cause somewhere. And we are not nurturing the cause actively, we are nurturing the cause passively. So, what is required is empowerment, because your mind has to change. You have to get up and fight for yourself and say that, okay, something bad has happened to me, but I'm not going to let this destroy me. Because as bad as it sounds, it's not going anywhere. If we have more advanced technology, the violence will also get more advanced, because we are just mirroring our real physical realm into the digital landscape. So this is what I see on a daily basis. I'm not somebody who's contesting cases for such victims, so many cases for such victims. I'll be very honest. But what I can say is that the laws are not at par, and they are certainly not with the time if technology is concerned. And it's not in India, it's anywhere in the world. The policy could be there. The implementation is poor. I agree, implementation is not easy. But I still, having considered all this, the solution has to be realistic. So the solution for me is empowerment.
But I just wanted to reflect on the access to this empowerment. I mean, we know that the resolution is empowerment, but how do we access empowerment, Aisha? I don't know if we have enough knowledge systems to access what's needed to be accessed in terms of understanding the realities of the legal system.
See, I can assure you about this, that in the bigger cities, I'm certain that the legal cells are very proactive.
Okay.
I'm
Hmm.
not saying that all the lawyers are doing it pro bono because they want to they're excessively magnanimous. A lot of them could just be doing it because they understand that those work experiences with the government, they count. Okay, but whatever motive they may have, they're serving. Just like you have a lot of government doctors, they have to serve in the Andaman and Nicobar, they have to serve in Daman and Diu, whether they like it or not. Some take it as a one-time vacation, some really want to do it. But the purpose is that they're there, the representation is there, so the access is there. You will have lawyers who will give you the legal aid. But where that legal aid is taking you and whether it is bringing you to the solution is a completely different thing. And it's not that the lawyer who's providing legal aid is not is incapacitated. The system is broken. Please understand. So you can have access to a lawyer who's ready and willing to help you. And in this situation, you certainly have women lawyers who come, who are very forthright, because it may not have happened to me, but I know how it may feel, right? But it's the system, the lapses in the system don't let you arrive at the solution.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely.
And compensation is not always redress. Some people just want that the person who did this should be brought to light. So the redress is missing, and the approach to reach that redress is missing.
Hmm. Right. This was so reflective in nature. This I am so grateful. We have had deeply read reflections on what the current state of affairs is, both globally and within the Indian context. Um, I mean, without further ado, I'd open the floor for questions from the audience. Uh, Professor Zaidi, Dr. Amina, Dr. Firdaus, Dr. Meher, if you have questions, please reflect on this conversation that we've had. It would be great to have your insights on this particular subject matter, and how do you feel about the digital realities that we are sort of encountering every day.
Uh, may I come in?
Of
Yeah,
course, Amina.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
So, Aisha and Pallavi, I absolutely love listening to both of you, and especially because you are young and you are in the field and you deal with these things hands on. So I was wondering, like when it comes to gender based violence, we have laws like POSH is there, Domestic Violence 2025 Act is there, and so there are these laws, but then they do not necessarily extend to digital spaces. So are there enough laws? I mean, we talk about implementation, we talk about access, we talk about empowerment, but in terms of legislation, do we need some more proactive legislation, or do we have sufficient safeguards when it comes to gender based violence in digital spaces? Either of you could reflect on this.
I think Aisha should definitely get the first chance to speak about it because she's the right person and an expert on it. Maybe I can speak from the international policy, but definitely Aisha.
Uh, Thank you, Pallavi, and thank you, ma'am, for your question. This is interesting. Um, One thing I would say is that Posh has been very successful in, at least alerting people in office spaces, in community spaces. Let's say that. Because the committees which are formed, I personally know a couple of people. I'm talking about men. I don't personally think that they were implicated or they were in the wrong. And later the committees found out that they were not in the wrong. But the formation of the committee, as per Posh, I'm talking about real instances, really alerted people. So the entire incubation of this act and the implementation of this act has, when it was incubated, it was at a very different stage, and now when it is implemented, it is acting as a deterrent. So Posh, certainly I would vouch for it because of its deterrent effect. As far as, again, the cybercrime is concerned, I don't know, and I would have the same opinion. For Posh, I would certainly say that community spaces have become safer, not because the people who were the perpetrators of violence have evolved, but maybe they're scared. Because it directly, and the reason is because it directly transcends into the physical realm. A committee is formed, you're questioned, and until and unless the committee reaches a conclusion, if you're in a job, you're not laid off, but you're sent on an indefinite leave. So because there is that threat and there is that danger of losing your job, people are really, really deterred in that space. Now, if we can do something similar in the digital space, we can have a similar success story.
Yeah, but so far probably we don't have enough laws. I mean, anyone can come in at this point because I can see Professor Mani Mekla is here, who is an expert in her own right. So this can be an open conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Nishat, and also the entire faculty there. First of all, to joining in this 16 days activism, and I really loved hearing these young scholars. We could bring both from academia as well as from academic activists, and also Shaitali for wonderfully moderating with the kind of questions to be posed. I just want to make some observations. Thanks to UN for bringing a convention on cybercrime in 24 that really demands the kind of intervention is required. But there are issues, like I fully agree with the statements and the inferences drawn in this discussion also, that there is a need to stand up and fight. And at the same time, the intersectional questions also, particularly from the working class or even the students, because one of my students is working on cyber violence, and she was actually JMA student in women's studies earlier, and now she is working with me. And it was also, it is bringing home message. Even the college students, they, when you get a message or when you are some wrong call comes, it's kind of giving up, deleting these messages, etc. Even one of my colleagues who got some vulgar messages from the student, it is a teacher, so that kind of it kind of shaming, for that also it was done. And she approached the cybercrime wing, and then police was handling, and it was going for 1 year together. It was not resolved. So there are one, it is not that we don't have the laws, we do have laws, but when you approach the concern also, there are delays and get diluted when it comes to question of women bringing any issues not actually seriously taken care of. And also there are issues where morphing is done, and it led to some of the girls committing suicide where the nude pictures fixed with her face. So these were very serious, and the girls did not have the guts to fight and prove. Rather, they felt ashamed and they committed suicide. So these are all, when you lose, we did talk about compensation, etc. But the very action is losing your life, and I am really concerned with suicides. So that is a very important issue. So we need to also this unite. This particular campaign is saying that unite to prevent violence against women, digital violence against women and girls, wherein we have to focus on preventive. Whatever is reported is very because of the factors which I will already underline. You also said that power ultimately. So the power, the intersectional variables, and the very culture in which you have been brought, particularly the girls, and therefore they are not even bringing reporting it, and that is one thing. And even reported also get diluted, not resolved proper, and therefore it further discourages the girls and women to. Uh, so that's what rather we have to concentrate on preventive issues, preventive methods. Yes.
Absolutely, Professor. Absolutely. And I mean, um this is what the reality is. And I think to be able to understand what the possible future is, it's only important and necessary for us to delve into conversations like this time
Exactly.
and again. I think this dialogue is the only way out in terms
So,
of when it comes to digital reality specifically. Um, Thank you, Professor. Thank you, everyone who is engaged so
Professor
thoughtfully in
Dr.
this.
Amina has a question, I think.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Please, ma'am. So
So yes,
sorry.
I think we still have a couple of minutes and
Of course, ma'am. We do.
we can make most of this panel. We have two experts with us, and both Aisha and Pallavi. I think you both speak from the field, basically, dealing with the survivors. So I'm interested. Maybe Pallavi, you can answer this. I have questions to both of you. So this the whole idea of memes as a this meme culture today that has come up, and it is often dismissed as harmless humor, but we know the misogynist means and how they are the carriers of hate, and they also work in normalizing violence by masking it at some kind of jokes and humor. So how can we understand memes as a form of digital gender based violence, and what kind of policy intervention or platform intervention are necessary, or how can we disrupt this everyday misogyny that is perpetuating through memes? I mean, we don't even consider it, but it's so subtle and it's so pervasive. So Pallavi, maybe you can reflect on that. And Aisha, I'm interested in, on your reflections on, incidents like Sulli deals and Bully By. They actually reflected how the digital spaces can be weaponized to sexually humiliate and target women, and especially marginalized, Muslim, women. I mean, in case of Sulli Bai and, Sulli deals and Bully Bai. So I want to know, what how can from, of course, from policy standpoint, and also how can, what safeguards in terms of can we build to prevent such targeted digital hate crimes that happen? Of course, all of this was removed eventually when the complaints were filed, but everything that's online, it's forever. There are ways to archive it. It's a permanent humiliation. So what kind of policy intervention and also safeguards that you foresee are necessary, or that have been implemented or are in the process? So if you can reflect on that.
Sure. Now, when I talk about memes, let's look at the bigger picture. Okay, let's first look at a top-down approach and how we're looking at problem solving. Memes obviously isolate from a digital revolution, which isolates from a foreign or a governance model that a particular geography is following. So let me just give you a context from where I'm coming. So I've had two masters. My first master's was in gender studies, where I was a Chevening scholar in the UK, and my second master's is the MBA from Oxford. Now, my thesis was on a feminist foreign policy, where my case study was Mexico, and because it's the first global South geography to have a feminist foreign policy. And an integral part of it was digital revolution. Now, when we talk about memes or any kind of online harassment and to have a governance framework for it, as colloquial and as rude as it may sound, we need to know our audience. Who is at that time in power in your particular country and what is their mandate? It doesn't. We need to stop romanticizing policy as a one size fits all. If I have a fascist government at the center, I will change my framework to get my job done. At the end of the day, women need to get their voices heard, right? So Mexico at that time has a fascist government. So eventually, the thesis which led to my deployment with the UN in Mexico was that we framed the entire framework around digital revolution, including means on the FDI policy. That if you do not have the right policy to target harassment of women in the form of memes, you will not get the right kind of FDI, especially from global north geographies. And hence, this will culminate into economic poverty, into your isolation in the global framework. So, for any kind of revolution, it is extremely important to understand your audience and who your governance master is, rather than romanticizing that entire process that, oh, right to equality is an integral part of my constitution. No, it is not. Let's be real. But at the end of the day, we can't remain in silos and we have to get the work done. So that's at the macro level. Now, when it comes to the micro level on how you and I can have an equal understanding of negating these needs, is as how Chetali mentioned. It is only through feminist bond to community and to making sure that we have the right kind of conversations in place, that we have the access and the power to hold people accountable. It could be in the form of targeting these people through social media while making sure that we do not have kangaroo courts, but also making sure the collectives are very strong. And it could be in the form of any kind of feminist associations. So the case study that I mentioned was actually very successful. Eventually, Mexico as a country used to have this rampant harassment of women on on the digital places. But when the caveat of FDI was floated to them, and here I'm obviously not putting women as a tokenistic representation of economic value, absolutely not. But at the end of the day, I need to get my work done through hook or crook. And for me, that it is important to understand who on behalf of me is making the decisions. So it is important to understand that how a particular policy needs to be framed to get the objective. And at the micro level, as Aisha mentioned and Chaitali mentioned, empowerment, but also through collective, through a lot of empathy, through a lot of accountability, and that only comes through feminist collectives and through self-help groups.
All right, Aisha, responding, if you want to respond to the next question that Dr.
Uh,
Amina has for you.
Ma'am, thank you for your question. Um, I'll add to what Pallavi said, but I'll also admit that I'm not aware of this bully bye thing that you said. I'm sorry, I'm not on social media. So if I missed out something, I'm sorry about that. But one instance and one solution I can give you is, which is unfortunate in today's date because of the lack of the right legislation, is the instance of Samir Raina. We've all followed that, right? The Supreme Court was forced to intervene because things got really out of hand, and it became a national issue. I mean, everybody was talking about it. Unfortunately, our national pastime is now social media. But what Samir Raina did on that show, and recently there was an order by the Supreme Court last week that you have to raise funds for the disabled through your comedy shows and call them to your show and appraise them for what they've done and for their efforts. So if it gets down to that level, and the only thing they could read into, the only piece of law was obscenity and vulgarity, so they were only targeting voyeurism, but you needed the Supreme Court to step in because you had some so-called celebrity comic stars who said something extremely vulgar on their show. And when you reach this stage, you realize that the deterrents are not there, right? The case of Munawar Faruqi a bit politicized, but of course there is vulgarity. Now I'll agree with Pallavi that you need your audience, right? I personally am also a fan of slapstick humor. I'm a fan of dark humor as well, and we all are. Let's not lie to ourselves. But again, I mean, joking about something in the abstract, it can't be. It will hurt somebody. You know, you hurl a stone, it will fall on somebody. It will hurt somebody's identity. But it has to be reasonable again. Now that reasonable is very subjective. I may not sound theoretically correct, but we all like dark humor. Like my favorite show is Two and a Half Men. I watch it every night before I sleep because I need to sleep with a light mind, and I'm going to accept it. Now, the humor in there, unfortunately, is dark and is misogynistic. So I have a sister, and she doesn't like it because according to her, that humor is not right. But for me, I personally think humor is humor, you know. So we have to talk from a very pragmatic angle because what is happening is in person. It's a practical reality. So you need sensitization, but you also need to understand that if it could be any kind of humor. it has to be in some kind of reasonable limit, and especially if you're watching that, if you're coming on national television or things like that, so you have to be a bit more accountable because you're reaching a much larger audience. Going on Netflix and choosing to watch something is very different than coming on national television. Somebody could say that, oh, but I chose to watch that particular TV channel. However, it is still national TV. So I feel that the fact that the Supreme Court had to intervene just shows that there is a complete breakdown of a deterrential framework. Laws are there to be deterrents, not that something has to go wrong and then you have to prosecute somebody for something like this. So I'm sure that what the Supreme Court has done is a strong deterrent to come for times to come, and all comedians are going to be at least a bit wary about what they say in a public show or on national TV, and not mock people to the extent that it's hurting a majority of people in the country. Because in today's date, victimization also has different definitions. It's become very subjective. Certain people just feel victims of something. It could just be a script as well. So you have to understand that, where we are getting at, what violence is. It gendered violence? What is the angle? What are the implications? Is there a deterrent? If there is, please bring that policy and make it a law.
I would agree to that, Aisha. I mean, um, then there are a lot of questions that come up. I mean, as we sort of will close the session with Dr. Amina, I just want to mention here that there are so many questions cropping up. Do we then, is there a need to sort of reproduce humor textually and in practice? um and especially with what is going on, and I'm grateful that you highlighted what's going on with the comedians in India. And Pallavi, I'm sure you were also aware of it. But yes, I mean, this is what's happening. And how do we reproduce humor? Do we work towards that when it comes to digital violence, per se, about memes, about the gifs, about everything that's going on around us on our screens? So with that, um, it was great. I mean, as Pallavi notes, there is hope when accountability expands, and Aisha brings forth that we must build systems where justice is accessible to all survivors and not just few. Um, with that, I would invite Dr. Amina to deliver a vote of thanks to the panel. And over to you, Dr. Amina.
All right. I hope I have unmuted myself. I'm not on mute, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Ma'am, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So
Pallavi, you want to say something before this? Pallavi had raised a hand.
Pallavi had read it. Yes.
No, no, no,
Pallavi.
I did not. I was saying a thumbs up to Dr. Amina that I can hear
Okay.
you
All
her
right.
very perfectly well.
Okay, so I guess with that we have come to a close of this very insightful, interesting session, and I'm here to offer the official vote of thanks. So on behalf of Sarojini Naidu Centre for Women's Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia, I'm here to extend sincere gratitude to all who have joined for this extension lecture, which is actually commemorating the International Day for the elimination of violence against women and marking 16 days of activism starting from 25th November. So I want to express my respectful thanks to our chief patron, Professor Mazhar Asif, Honorable Vice Chancellor, for his constant encouragement, and to our patron, Professor Mehtab Alam Rizvi, Registrar, for his continued support for the center's work. I'm also extremely grateful for our two very young, distinguished speakers, scholars, Pallavi Mahajan and Advocate Ayesha Jamal, for offering very incisive and very timely insights into this gender based violence in the digital age, a digital space which is constantly in the real time evolving. And we have failed to, actually make pace with those changes in terms of the legislature, in terms of the policies, and we can see the harm and the way it has been manifested. We all agree it's not a neutral space. It is replicating, or rather, exponentially increasing the harms that we already see in the physical world, and we are grappling with that. And this conversation is part of understanding how to uh, you know uh, how to make the digital space, which is going to be more expansive in the coming future with the AI, how to make it a safe and empowering space for all of us. So thank you so much for your contributions, for your insights. Both of you, your reflections were rooted in the spaces that you come from. uh, uh, Pallavi spoke from the international perspective of the algorithmic vulnerabilities, the gaps in data protection, platform governance, cross-border enforcement. And Advocate Aisha, was more drawn to in the Indian legal context, and also about the recent jurisprudence, on online harassment and your survivor centered justice. So we need all these to understand this further. So thank you so much for your perspectives, have really shown us that this digital violence, of course, it is not a technical issue, it's legal, it's ethical. These are social challenges, that we need to grapple with. Also, my heartful thanks to Professor Nishad Zaidi, who's a director for Sarojini Naidu Centre for Women Studies, for her constant guidance, for her vision, for leading not just this event, but many more, that our center has now has become synonymous, with these academic, endeavors and programs. So thank you, ma'am. Also, I would like to thank our collaborators at CWDS, Professor Mani Mekalai, for actually starting this, initiating this, and the other 16 participating university for strengthening this collective academic initiative. I would like to thank University and from Jamia. Thank you so much for being part of today's program. I guess we look forward, to continuing this important conversation in days ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chaitali and Amina. Thank you so much.